anybody who doesn't know me, I'm Richard McCready. I'm the political officer for the Co-op Party in Scotland, and I'm going to invite Rita Miller, the chair of the Co-op Party, to welcome you to the meeting and start and introduce our first speaker. So, Rita.
Thank you, Richard. Is that me unmuted?
Yes.
Thank you. Great. Thank you all for joining this Zoom call. As Richard said, I'm Rita Miller. I'm the chair of the Scottish Co-operative Party. I'm really pleased to be able to talk to you today. The last one of these sessions that I was at was the Welsh one, which I must say was very, very interesting. Our topic is cooperation and the Scottish Parliament. And today we will hear from Scottish Labour leader and Co-operative Party member, Richard Leonard MSP. We'll follow that with a question and answer session. After that, we'll hear from Johann Lamont, also an MSP, and Councillor Eva Murray. We'll be reflecting also on the Co-op Party's recently launched report on building back after COVID-19, and that's called Owning the Future. And if you haven't seen it yet, you can download it from the Co-op website. Now, before I introduce the speakers, since this is a new way of working, I need to cover some of the technical issues in terms of how this meeting is run via Zoom. Firstly, you need to know that this Zoom call is being recorded. Many of our members cannot access things live, and therefore we'll make it available on the Co-op Party's YouTube channel. So if you don't want your image to be seen, simply remove yourself from the video and go to audio only. But we hope you'll stay with us on audio. To make the content of the call clearer, as Richard has been saying already, those that are not speaking will have the sound muted, and those who do speak will have it enabled. When we're holding the question and answer session, that will be after Richard speaks, and we've received a lot of pre-submitted questions. If you're one of the people that submitted those questions, you will be unmuted so that you can ask your question. And if you want to ask a question during the meeting that you haven't, put forward in advance, you can do it in 3 ways. First of all, you can write into the chat function. One of our staff is monitoring that and will send the question to Richard so that it can be asked. You can email it to events@coop@party.coop, or you can click the item labelled participants on your PC or your phone screen, then click the button labelled raise hand. Your digital hand is now raised and we're aware that you want to ask a question. When it's your turn to ask a question, we'll introduce you and you will be unmuted. You can also actually put your hand up and someone will see you on screen, provided you're not on audio, of course, only on audio. As usual, please try and keep your questions short and don't make speeches instead of asking questions so that we can fit in as many as possible. Thank you all again for joining in, and I hope you will indeed join in and ask questions, and let's get started. Firstly, we're going to hear Richard Leonard, who is a very fierce cooperator who has written about many times about co-op's values and principles, and we're very pleased to have him as leader of the Scottish Labour Party. Richard, you'll now be unmuted. Thank you.
Rita, thanks very much indeed. And yeah, I suppose my own interest in cooperation really stems principally from my days as an assistant secretary at the Scottish TUC when I was placed on the board of the Scottish Co-operative Development Company, which at that time had a decent number of staff and was very active in getting workers' cooperatives primarily up and running. And that was a time in the early 90s, really. So there was a fairly choppy economic climate, and it was often an alternative future for people to look at the cooperative option rather than facing redundancy and unemployment. So it's something which I will reflect on in the course of the next few minutes, because I do think we are on the brink of a major economic crisis, and we need to find creative and innovative ways of finding answers to that. I do reflect that the cooperative movement is really founded on those values of mutual aid and internationalism, of peace and cooperation. And it seems to me they are precisely the values upon which we as a society are fighting this pandemic, because people are making huge self-sacrifice, not least in what we take for granted as our civil liberties, in order to benefit the common good and the common well-being. And we are seeing, with the odd exception, like the Prime Minister's chief aide, but for most people, we are seeing sacrifice of individual rights in order to benefit the collective. And these, it seems to me, are the values that the Cooperative Party, the trade union movement, the Labour Party are absolutely established on. And so that does create the space for us to talk about those values and how they might be pursued as we come out of the lockdown. I think the choice that we face is, do we attempt to restart the economy, or do we attempt to reshape the economy? And I think we need to look at how we can reshape the economy. It seems to me that when the mist lifts on the lockdown and we get beyond the furloughed schemes and the grants and the loans and so on, we are going to be staring at mass unemployment. The the GDP figure yesterday showed an incredibly sharp drop in output, and we know that young people especially were hit in the early days of lockdown, because they were much more likely to be employed in those industries that were shut down, whether it's hospitality, whether it was non-food retail, whether it was the hotel and tourism sector. So, and I think the Institute for Fiscal Studies worked out that if you were a worker below the age of 26, you were 2.5 times more likely to have been laid off than if you were an older worker. So there will be a big challenge that we will need to face, which is not just how are we going to tackle mass unemployment. It's also going to be about how do we tackle mass youth unemployment. And so I think we need to look at targeted measures that will give a helping hand to those young people, many of whom, of course, were laid off from precarious contracts, 0 hours contracts, or agency working and so on. So we need to go back and revisit that, and we need to start saying some pretty strong things about how that needs to change. I think it's evident all around us that the manufacturing base of Scotland is in deep trouble. In fact, I would go so far as to say entire industries are at risk. And as the events unfold, I think that's becoming clearer and clearer by the day. We know that nighttime economies have gone, and how quickly can they come back? And we know that town centres, which were already struggling badly, have been choked off, and whether they can be revived, I think, remains to be seen. But it's going to be a big challenge, because I don't think that we should abandon town centres. I think we need to look at what we can do to regenerate town centres. I think we also know that public services are going to be under enormous pressure. We know that there is a massive backlog of elective surgery in the health service. I think most of us, with any understanding of what's been happening over the last 12 weeks, 13 weeks, knows that there will be a mental health crisis at the end of this and in the future as a result of this. We know that there are huge pressures on the care sector, and I'll say a bit more about that shortly, and there are big challenges in our education system as well, from higher education to primary school education and to nursery education. There is, I think, a massive challenge, but I think the scale of those challenges demands that we come up with bold responses. And I, for one, don't want to go back to the old divided economy that we left behind. I don't want to go back to rundown public services, to the levels of homelessness that we saw, to child poverty, pensioner poverty, and in work poverty. I think that the experience of the last couple of months has reawakened interest in the balance between working life and life outside work. In Scotland, we've got a particular issue about a long hours working culture, so that 250,000 workers in Scotland work beyond the EU Working Directive 48-hour week, and many of them do it not because of their desire to work long hours. Many of them do it because they're so poorly paid that they have to work long hours to get a decent take-home pay. So there are things that we need to change in the future. One of the things which I think as cooperators is of interest to us is the ownership of the economy, and what that means for the decline and the challenge that we face and how we get out of it. So I was looking at some figures again just this morning to get the latest figures. So if we look at large enterprises in Scotland, i.e. those that employ over 250 people, by 2019, only 18% of those were Scottish owned. 42% were owned from the rest of the UK, and 40% were overseas owned. So the kind of the commanding heights of the Scottish economy are not owned in Scotland. They are largely owned either as part of UK companies, or else are subsidiaries of overseas owned multinationals. And actually, if you look in the manufacturing sector, I think that the level of overseas ownership is now over 50%. So 53% of all those larger manufacturing enterprises are overseas owned. And that means crucial decisions about the future of those enterprises, the future of the jobs of the people who work in them, are going to be made in overseas boardrooms. And so the SNP's policy, to the extent that they've had an economic strategy, has been to largely rely on foreign direct investment. Now, I'm not against foreign direct investment, but we've got an economy which is way out of kilter, so that we are hugely dependent on external ownership. And I think that will present challenge. It's already presenting challenges in parts of our manufacturing base. And as I said earlier, I think that when the mist lifts from the lockdown, I think that there will be even bigger challenges that we will face right across the economy. So, Rita, you mentioned at the start the Co-op parties owning the future document, which isn't, in my view, just a contribution to the debate. It forms very much part of the Scottish Labour Party's vision and thinking for how the economy needs to move forward. And I hope that the principal ideas, which I will address in a minute, the principal ideas in the Owning the Future proposals, I hope will see their rightful place inside the Scottish Labour Party's 2021 manifesto for the Scottish Parliament elections, because they speak to the kind of change that I think not just we on the political left think is needed. I think it speaks to the kind of change that there is a new dawning, a new realisation amongst people across communities, across Scotland, an understanding that we need to do things differently, and we need to change. So let me address in turn the principal points of the document. So first of all, it talks about the importance of an expansion of the cooperative sector. People may recall that going into the general election in December, we were talking as a party about doubling the size of the cooperative sector. I have to say, I thought that was quite an under-ambitious target, because the scope for growth of cooperative ownership is absolutely huge. If the right instruments are in place, if the legal ground upon which these things are considered is balanced, and if we've got the right institutional framework to support it. So I reflect that it was back in 2006 that the Labour-led Scottish Executive established Cooperative Development Scotland. As I mentioned earlier, I think it's been largely run down and ignored by the SNP. It's embedded in Scottish enterprise. and last time I checked, it was its budget was less than 1% of the whole of the Scottish enterprise, Highlands Isles enterprise budget. So it's absolutely minuscule and absolutely marginalised, and that's why it's my view that we need to demand the creation of a statutory cooperative development agency in Scotland. I think we need to look at what additional resource it needs, and in that I include technical expertise that's needed to support and develop the cooperative sector. But in that, I think also needs to be investment resource as well. Now, whether that comes through the Scottish National Investment Bank or whether there is a separate Scottish Cooperative Development Fund, we can discuss, but there needs to be a visible, clear route for support for people who are either already in existing cooperatives that need support to grow, develop, or to remain, because the pressures that we describe in the wider economy will affect the cooperative-owned sector as well. But it's also, it seems to me, about what else can be done to give stimulus to cooperative forms of ownership. And I've spoken before about the need for the import of the Italian legal position, which is the Marcora law, which gives Italian workers basically a statutory right. If the enterprise that they work in is making redundancies, or indeed is facing complete closure, they've got a right to use actually part of their redundancy funds to get match funding from the state to convert that enterprise into a cooperatively owned one. Now, I think we need to take a bit of a wider view, and I think I reflect on the experience of the 70s when there were Benite Phoenix cooperatives, which didn't always last because they came out of a fairly difficult economic position, and so my view is that we can, of course, provide for a right for workers who are facing the closure of their business or facing redundancy, a right to own that business. But we should also look at situations where a business is up for sale, for example. And I make the parallel with the Land Reform Act. So when an estate or a piece of land is up for sale, there is a statutory right that communities have got to bid for that land. Why shouldn't we have an Industrial Reform Act and Common Ownership Act that provides for workers being given a right to own an enterprise when it's put up for sale? So that's something which I think, if we had in place now, would be something that people, the length and breadth of the economy, could be looking at as an option for them. It's my view that working people will not always take that option, but it's far better that they've got the right to take that option, that they can make their own history, rather than that they are at the end point of a chain of command, which is largely decided, by absentee shareholders and boards of directors. So, it just seems to me that that would be a way of democratizing the economy in quite an imaginative way. And as I always say, why shouldn't the creators of the wealth own the wealth that they create? The second proposal in the Owning the Future document speaks to job retention and employee ownership, and to some extent, I've tackled that. I do think that there is substantial international evidence that when Labour hires capital rather than capital hiring Labour, when there is a recession, jobs are less likely to be shed, because the people who are making the decision are all employee owners, so that they will look at other means of survival rather than resorting to what is often a first resort in conventionally owned businesses of making people redundant and shedding labour. So I think that there is a virtue in the cooperative model at a time of challenge, recession. We've also spoken in the Parliament over the last few weeks, and I know that this is an idea which the TUC and others support, of the case for a job guarantee scheme. So not just a job retention scheme, but a job guarantee scheme, so that we are looking at especially how we can engage young people who otherwise will be left isolated and abandoned from the working community. And I think we need to, we need to step in to make sure that a whole generation isn't lost. And I don't know about anybody else on the call, but as I look around, there is no shortage of useful work to be done. So let's look at how we can invest in getting some of that work carried out. Similarly, point 3, the cooperative Green New Deal, I think is absolutely right. One of the things I reflect on over the course of the last few weeks is that we have seen a much higher level of conversation and discussion between the Scottish Government, between trade unions and between employers. Although my friends in the STUC tell me that the employers are not especially willing to sit around the table in a tripartite way. They have bilateral meetings twice a week with the government. Now, I think this is one of the positive approaches that's been made during the course of this crisis. But I think it should be embedded. I think it should be part of a long-term approach. I mean, it just seems to me if we are going to move beyond the market, and if we are going to start to plan the economy and look 5 years down the line, 10 years down the line, which I, strongly believe we need to do, and making that just transition to the green economy demands that, it's got to be done on a planned basis, and it can't be imposed from the top. It needs to be done so that trade unions, employers are part of that change that we need to bring about. So I think that there is a strong case, in my view, for a permanent arrangement that brings in trade unions, that brings in employers, together with government and the kind of critical government agencies, that looks at how we can plan our way in the future. The plan for fair tax is one that I'm sure we all would subscribe to. I mean, the history of Amazon, of Richard Branson, who's been out with his begging bowl recently, are well known. But I also think that when the spotlight has been placed on the residential care sector, for example, we see that the largest private provider of residential care for the elderly in Scotland, HC1, is owned by is a subsidiary of a company owned in the Channel Islands, which in turn is a subsidiary of the overall parent company, which is incorporated in the Cayman Islands. And I'm sure they're not there just for the sunshine. I mean, there is just something wrong, it seems to me, about the provision of such an important part of our public service, that it's run in that way according to those values. So, I think we've been speaking as a party about the need for a Scottish care service to go alongside a national health service. And I'm interested in people's views on the call today about what that might look like and how we might deliver that. To what extent it will be a national service, maybe setting national standards, national terms and conditions for employees, and to what extent it could be delivered at a more local level through local government or through other means. So it will be useful to have a discussion about that. My other point on the fair tax demand, which is in the document, is I would recall that in 2008, after the financial crash, Labour was in government at a UK level, and Alistair Darling, you may recall, put up the top rate of income tax. So it went from 45p to 50 pence in the pound, which I think was absolutely the right thing to do. When David Cameron and George Osborne arrived with the support of Nick Clegg and the Liberals, and let's not forget, the first act of George Osborne was to bring down the top rate of income tax back down to 45 pence in the pound. It was to cut corporation tax and to set out a journey of reduction year upon year of corporation tax. And it was to put up value-added tax, which is the most regressive form of taxation, which hits the poorest the hardest. So there was a shift in the burden of taxation then. And I have to say, I think we need to be extremely vigilant that there isn't a shift in the burden of taxation this time round as well. And I can, because I can see that those who have got the broadest shoulders, who could very easily make a bigger contribution, may not be, and it may be spread amongst those actually least able to pay. So I think we need to make the case for fairer forms of taxation, including a fairer burden of taxation. And I could talk about that more if people want to ask questions on it. The last two things, Rita, that are in the plan, in the report, are one, a plan for alternative financial services, and I think there are opportunities for everything from the credit union movement up to the Scottish National Investment Bank. And I know that there's been some research done on, are there intermediate levels of banking at a kind of regional level that might be progressed. It's not an area I've got much expertise in, but I think it's useful to explore it. I think that there is a huge merit in the demand for a place-based economy, that community wealth building model, which was imported, I think, from Cleveland into Preston and has now found its way into North Ayrshire. I think is a really exciting model. I mean, if you look at the huge leakage which goes out of local and regional economies, there is so much more we could do to ensure that there is the circular flow income stays within local economies much more than it does. And I reflect on the fact that we talk a lot about public procurement. And when you examine it closely, the principal beneficiaries of public procurement are not SMEs or, heaven forfend, cooperatives on a small scale. They are big, large multinational corporations. So the prison service escort arm is run by GeoAmy, a huge American multinational. I'm looking at Johann, the catering provider in the Scottish Parliament are Sodexo, a huge French multinational corporation. The Scottish Refugee Council has got a virtual festival on today, and Serco is how did we ever get to a position where a private profit-driven enterprise was responsible for our asylum system? There's something profoundly wrong with that, and we need to challenge it. You can go to Hare Myers Hospital and you see ISS providing services there, again, another big multinational. So we need to start talking about the value of community wealth building, about trying to ensure that we stop the huge leakage of profits and revenue out of the economy, and look at how we can localize ownership and democratize ownership much more. And I think that means we also need to return to some of the things that we've spoken about in the movement in the past, which is about pension funds and how we can have more democracy over pension funds and how can they be used to reinvest in local economies. And finally, a plan for democratic ownership is in there. I mean, I've always been of the view, and may not have always been popular, but I've always been of the view that our approach to public ownership should be much more of a mosaic than a monolith, that we should be looking not just at some kind of top-down model, but we should be looking at how we can encourage and foment bottom-up democratization of the economy. And so, which is why I've always been a great supporter of workers' cooperatives, which is why I've always been somebody who has supported employee ownership as a means of changing the way the economy can work. So I do think we need to look at the best level at which democratic ownership can be exercised. With the railways, it seems to me at a Scottish level, ScotRail should be in some form of public ownership. We've spoken in the Parliament and in the party about buses and how they could be returned to municipal ownership. And there's a massive crisis in public transport at the moment, as people will recognise. I think that there needs to be a mature discussion about what the future ownership model for public transport is. Energy, we've spoken about in the cooperative movement before, and about different forms of renewable energy ownership and how that could be democratized. I issue a warning note, and that is, as well as making the case for extending public ownership, I think we need to be aware that there will be pressure in some quarters for further privatization to offset some of the indebtedness which the state is in. And it's not that long ago that the SNP were contemplating part privatization of the Forestry Commission. It's not that long ago that the SNP were contemplating selling off Scottish Water. Now, as a trade union organiser, I dealt with Scottish Water. They are not the perfect democratic organisation, but they are in public ownership, and I think, you know, and I'm in favour of looking at reforming that ownership and how we can make it more democratic. But I think we need to also to be, I think, aware that there will be pressures from some quarters for sales of public assets in order to fund some of the debt which has been racked up. So, Rita, I think I'll finish on that note. I just think it's important that we discuss these ideas, because there is always a danger of the Scottish Labour Party being known for what it's against and not what it's for. These ideas are exactly a part of our vision of how we want to see things change, how we want to see democracy, not just in the political system, but in the economic system as well. And that, it seems to me, is a fight worth making. I think it stretches back to our radical tradition as a party and as a movement which has got such strong roots in cooperation in Scotland. And you know, I think that there is a great tradition there for us to build on. But it isn't just about tradition. It's about what fits, what answers we can provide to the scale of the crisis that we face in 2020, 2021, and for the next few years, because this is going to be a long-term challenge that we face, which is why I think there may not be there probably are some shortcuts that we can take, but I think we're talking about a long haul here, and providing we keep at the centre of that our burning desire for change, a burning desire to see democracy extended, and a burning desire to put people first, and to put people before profit in the provision of public services. I think we will go a long way to win popular support for that agenda. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Richard. I think that's you know, really impressive discussion on our paper. And if people haven't seen it, in the group chat, there's a link to the paper. There's also a link to the blog which Richard did yesterday on that, so, and you can find all of those on our website. I've got a couple of questions. Just if people want to ask a question, can they indicate if you know how to do it? There are you know, it'd be good to get people to put the virtual hand up, which is you can get from the participant part of the screen. So I've got 3 to be going on with just now. So Sarah Boyack, I'm coming to you first. Hold on. So Sarah, Stephen Docherty, and then Leslie Marion Cameron. So Sarah, I think you're unmuted, hopefully. Oh.
Thanks, Richard.
Yep.
It's an issue we were discussing at our Labour leaders group from local authorities on Thursday this week, Richard, and it was about what we can do to rebuild our economy using cooperative principles. And I waxed lyrical about the Scottish election manifesto, and everyone said, actually, we're talking about now. What can we do now to use cooperative principles for our high streets, local economies? So just wondering, and I see around, there's loads of people from different parts of Scotland, so local economy is a big deal for all of us. Thanks.
Okay, I think we'll take the questions in 3. So Stephen Docherty, are you ready to ask your question?
Okay, I think there's an opportunity to have the Co-op Party and the Labour Party to look at co-op models for local authorities, looking at ways to run parks, look at ways to keep income in-house rather than going out to private individuals. So we can have restaurants, cafes, etc. We don't need to destroy the green space. There's opportunities to kind of embrace this and engage. I think this is the time. Mental health has been mentioned already, and green space has been a valuable tool for people. So that's where I'm coming from.
Okay, thanks, Stephen. And finally, in this round of questions, Leslie Marion Cameron, you there?
Yes. Hello,
Hi.
Good morning, everybody. Richard, I just wanted to ask, just following your comments on the tax burden, do you think that there's more of an appetite, or there'll be less resistance to increasing tax, corporation tax, and the higher level of income tax, given that people have seen, you know, the decimation of our public service, but more importantly, that businesses have, been helped by the government, by taxpayers' money. Normal, ordinary people's taxes have gone to bail out companies. So my own view is I think there will be less resistance and more support for that from ordinary working people. The other thing I wanted just to flag up is that one of the things I made sure of as economy lead for Labour here in Edinburgh was that our 5-year economy strategy grew the cooperative sector and also social enterprises. And I'm very keen and determined to make sure that we do not slip back from that as we flesh out our economy recovery plan here in Edinburgh. But that'll be up to us as cooperative councillors to do that. But I'm up for the fight and would welcome your support and encouragement of that in any speeches or whatever. Thanks very much, Richard. Host Richard.
Yeah, okay, thanks. Before we go back to Richard, anybody got any other questions? Could you put them in the chat or do the virtual hand up? So back to Richard Leonard to answer some of those.
Thank you. Well, I mean, it's interesting. The point is well made that we can't wait until next May to produce solutions because people are going to be plunged into unemployment, economic precariousness, and big social as well as economic challenges over the course of the next few weeks. So we absolutely need to be ready with a pressing alternative that will be something that we can pursue inside the Parliament, for example. So, I mean, it's interesting. The Fiona Hislop, who's the Economy Secretary, made a speech about kind of steps out of the lockdown 2 weeks ago, I think it was, where she spoke about the well-being economy, and this was now was the time to embrace the idea of the well-being economy. So I think that there is some interest in looking beyond reheating the old model, even on the ranks of the SNP, and so I just think it's about trying to push them in that direction. I have to say I'm not entirely persuaded they completely get the cooperative ideal and all that, but anyway, I think we need to try. But I also absolutely take the point that whilst we are out of power in Holyrood and Westminster, we are in power in local government in parts of Scotland, and we need to be encouraging, supporting, sharing ideas about the art of the possible with Labour in local government, because they've been under huge pressure over the last decade. The disproportionate squeeze in the support for local government has been nothing less than scandalous. But they still, even within that construct, have been able to come up with pioneering and innovative ideas. And I often speak about the Fife Council under Labour control. Now it's under joint control of the SNP, investing in care villages. So on the one site, you've got daycare centres, sheltered housing and residential care centres. And so a municipal solution to that challenge that we face with of an ageing population. There are, and the work that's been started in North Ayrshire around community wealth building, I think is a really good example of that. And down the years, there have been lots of examples where Labour in power in local government has come up with strong ideas that have changed people's lives, that have also then translated onto a national stage. And I think we need to look at what we can do to take those ideas, to give support to local government, and to nurture those alternatives. Because I mentioned about the decimation of high streets, and that is a massive challenge that we face, and has got to find creative solutions. To Stephen's point, I think you make a very strong case for the importance of investing in green space. And actually, when I was speaking about the danger of assets being sold, we know that sometimes the pressure can be to sell assets like green space. We know as well, and certainly I know from my own experience in central Scotland, there is a huge amount of pressure on the green belt as well, and we need to do all that we can to defend that. you raised the point about public spaces, park spaces and so on, and I think that's right. My general approach is to encourage the conversion of private ownership to cooperative ownership rather than from municipal ownership to cooperative ownership. As I say, I'm in favour of a kind of mosaic, not a monolithic approach, and I think there is room for public and democratic ownership through cooperatives and public and democratic ownership through local government, for example. But I think the big challenge we face is that is the huge level of external ownership we've got in the major employers in the country, and what we can do to start to challenge that, and how can we look at ways of making that more democratic. To Leslie's point, I think that there is the experience of a decade or so ago was that I mean, many of us, probably including many of us on this call, thought that the financial crisis and the collapse of that model of capitalism, which spread from America over the Atlantic to the UK and to Europe, would lead to a fundamental rethink on how the system would work. And actually, there hasn't been a huge amount of reform at all. And there has been, instead of a left turn economically and politically, I think it's fair to argue there's been a right turn economically and politically. So I am an optimist, and we need to do everything we can to give people hope and to give them confidence that these solutions that we are talking about this afternoon are within their grasp, that they are radical, but they are also credible, and they provide a concrete way forward for people to do things differently, to take more control, if I can borrow that phrase, over their own lives, whether it's at work or in the communities. So I think that we have to win that battle of ideas. I don't think, Leslie, we won it a decade or so ago at the last crisis, but actually we know from yesterday's figures alone, the scale of this crisis today compared to the scale of that crisis in 2008 is massively greater. And so the solutions we need to find will not be found in some kind of managerial tinkering. They will require, in my view, a pretty fundamental rethink about how the economy works, and also the role of the state in intervening in the economy. I mean, anybody who thinks that some kind of laissez-faire rolling back of the state, which if you go back to Boris Johnson's leadership campaign, he was very much on the platform of how can we shrink the state and allow private enterprise to flourish, that old kind of crowding out argument. So I'm not sure which direction the Tories will go in their fiscal proposals, but I think we need to strongly make the argument that currently the burden of taxation is unfairly distributed. For example, it's unfairly distributed between the amount you pay on capital gains versus the amount you pay on wages and salaries. You pay twice as much tax on a wage than you do if you get a dividend from your shares, if you have any. So I think there are these issues, I think, around the tax system that we need to go back to. And the other thing I would also reflect, and I noticed that Kenny Farquharson in the Times was talking, I think just yesterday, about the sense in which the time has come for a wealth tax, and I think that's right. Something I've spoken about for some time, and I think we've experienced not only a massive increase in inequality of income, but actually an even greater increase in inequality of wealth over the last decade. And of course, some people have rightly been reflected on the fact a lot of that wealth is inherited over a very long time period, some of which can even be traced into the slave trade, which of course has come right to the top of the public agenda.
Okay, thanks very much, Richard. I mean, just on Stephen Docherty's point, we are in the middle of developing a campaign on which we're calling Love It, List It, which is about protecting spaces. We're developing a Scottish version of it. It's kind of at the moment based on the Localism Act in England, but we will develop a Scottish version. And there's also good work being done by Fields and Trust and our friends at the cooperative group on that. And I know Sarah, I think you mentioned that, I think in Parliament maybe, but we will do stuff on that in the next little while, so people watch out for that. So the next 3 questions I've got are Tom Flanagan, Kay Morrison and Craig Carson. So if you're ready, Tom, I think yeah, Tom, you should be.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. Just picking up a couple of points that Richard made about municipal investment and town centre revitalisation. I think one of the more insidious mechanisms that have led to the decimation of town centres has been the issue of Zone A rental, where an area is designated as top retail, and so it's driven out independent retailers from a lot of our town and city centres. I think there's an opportunity for a bold approach by local authorities to reclaim our town centres, to reclaim the high street. Given that borrowing levels are at an all-time low, the opportunity is there for local authorities to start building back ownership of our town and city centres and to actually recast our city centres as places where people live again. So addressing the issue of homelessness, to provide affordable accommodation in a lot of the vacant properties that exist in town centres, and to recast town centres as an opportunity for a kind of an independent retail experience where people can actually support local retail, build on that community wealth building opportunity, and actually build back the life of the community in our town and city centres.
Okay, thanks, Tom. Kay Morrison, you're next. Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, can hear you.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you for allowing me to ask this question. I'm talking to you from, I would like to say, deepest, darkest Essex, where I have arrived to my surprise. However, I'm an honorary Scot, so I hope you don't mind my joining you, because I was
Former Fife councillor, you're very welcome, Kay.
So I think I'll always be with you. My question is about Black Lives Matter, about the statues, about that whole issue, which has become a colossal issue for everybody. And as you can imagine, down here, there's a lot of discussion, a lot of debate, and a lot of disagreement. Some of our Labour colleagues would argue that we have to keep all the statues that we've got, because apparently they help to educate us. That's how we learn. If that were so, I think we would have an awful lot of statues, wouldn't we? Because there's a selection process. There's a decision-making process. Somebody or a group of people decide who's going to be celebrated via a statue. So as far as I'm concerned, they're not inevitable. We don't have to keep them all forever. But I would like us to have, or to have the opportunity to have, a proper discussion, a proper conversation about this whole issue. It's a very, very sensitive one, but we can, as a Co-op party and Labour Party, we can take the opportunity, if that doesn't sound too opportunistic, to establish and to detail our position, our stance. We can be nuanced and yet passionate, because there's a huge issue here to do with the rights of other human beings, all of us really. So I've given you a few minutes, Richard, because I've been blethering on, to consider your response.
Okay, and whilst we're at it, I've asked the question today, yesterday's Courier, why there are more statues of cartoon characters in Dundee than of women, but that's that may be adding to it. Could we ask Craig Carson? Sorry, I should be digressing. Craig Carson, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, thank you, Richard. My question is more about childcare. I think we're realising now that this is going to be a really significant issue as time goes on. You know, for example, I'm a primary school teacher, and I found out yesterday that my class has been split in half and will only be in 2 days a week each half. So, you know, parents will have to find 3 days worth of childcare, and obviously childcare costs are a significant issue. And I just wondered if there's maybe a route here for us to maybe advocate and promote more cooperative models of childcare. involving parents and stakeholders, and especially if local authorities are going to start looking around for childcare providers, for key workers during the day. I wondered if there's maybe a route maybe for Labour-run councils and the Co-operative Party to kind of advocate a bit more of the cooperative model for parents. Thank you.
Okay, Richard.
Yeah, thank you. Well, let me start then with Craig. I think that is a huge practical challenge, and I'm not sure that anybody has come up with a satisfactory solution. And so we saw, for example, the schools in England planning to go back and then the plug being pulled, and I think there were a range of reasons for that, but I suspect a part of the reason was because that whole system for coping when parents, guardians go back to work, I don't think had been thought through, and I think there is going to be, it's not entirely clear to me how we are going to do that. I mean, it seems to me that there are issues around looking at working time that may provide part of the answer to that. There are and therefore a requirement on employers to be much more flexible, but that doesn't get away from the fact that what you are describing is the reality of a kind of a halving of the number of kids that are at school, or a doubling of the amount of time that's going to be required. So I think it's going to demand significant state intervention, and if it's state intervention in order to enable a cooperative solution or a mutual solution, then I think that's something we need to look at. But I think just as central government has been required to intervene over the last 3 months, I think it's going to continue to need to intervene, over the next 3 years or whatever. This is a long-term thing, and anybody who thinks that by the time we get to August in Scotland, it's all going to be sorted out and everything's going to be straightforward, I think is in for a bit of a rude awakening. So there needs to be a proper plan, and I know that there have been discussions with the teaching unions and with certainly from our group, Ian Gray's been involved in discussions with John Swinney and others. So there are attempts to try to find a way through this. But just as people have called for a national effort in the face of this national crisis, there's going to have to be a national effort in the face of how things will have to change as we come out of lockdown. So it's going to require some creative thinking. And Craig, if you've got ideas, if people that you work with have got ideas about how this might work, then we need to understand that. I mean, I'm a great believer not just in economic democracy but in industrial democracy, and so it seems to me the people at the sharp end, at the point of production or the point of teaching, are actually the ones that should be involved in the design of how we're going to do this, and I think that's that just seems to me to be fundamentally important if we're going to get a kind of sensible way through this, if we're going to provide the support that people will need. To Kay's point, I mean, the truth of the matter is, I think I don't know what the position is in Dundee, Richard. I haven't been around counting statues. I know there is a big one of Desperate Dan, but the position in places like Edinburgh is I don't think there's a single statue to a woman in the whole of Edinburgh, or there might be one now to Elsie Ingalls, but there is a real bias, and that is as a result of political choices that have been made in different eras. I mean, I think there is a huge case for statues to be relocated and put in a different context. There is I think there is obviously a growing pressure, and I don't need to tell people on this call, but that the action taken in Bristol last Sunday night was the end of a 5-year campaign to try to get through civil means that statue removed, and that's how it finished up. So I think that there is from my perspective, I think we should be looking at the removal and replacement of those statues where people who are lauded publicly in that way have got a record which is not one that we would support. On Tom's point about town centres, I think that there is well, in Paisley Town Centre there is a statue of Robert Tannehill, so I think cultural figures are probably quite a good thing. But there is a real issue in town centres like Paisley, for example, where the centre has been absolutely decimated. In that case, not least because you've got on the one hand Silverburn and on the other hand you've got Bray Head. So decisions have been taken over the years to invest in out of town shopping centres, and lo and behold, town centres therefore face massive pressure. But I think that a few years ago, I know that when Labour ran Renfrewshire Council, they tried to find out who owned the high street, who owned the property above the shops and so on. And of course, it became extremely difficult to find that out. And I know that they tracked somebody down who lived in Dorset that didn't have a clue that they owned property in Paisley. The reason that exercise was carried out because they were considering basically putting compulsory purchase orders on and taking that property back into some kind of public ownership. And so we see the return of people to town centres, and there's been quite a lot of building of flats and so on in the centre of Paisley, which again is an attempt to try to revitalise the centre, because for quite a long time town centres were places that became deserted at night times. And I think the idea that many local authorities have been trying to pursue is to look at ways in which that can be changed. And so that, it seems to me, is about getting people back into town centres. It's about looking at what we can do to provide housing for people in town centres. But it is also about how we can provide a kind of rich cultural investment in town centres as well. And one of the things that I fear as a result of the pandemic is that, I mean, we know that because of social distancing and the pressures that there are, that the kind of arts and culture sector is going to be under, and is already under, huge pressure, and no immediate light at the end of their tunnel. So I think that there is going to need to be a strong case put up for the retention of those facilities, the retention of those jobs of people who work in delivery of arts and culture. And I think we need to see that as part of the pathway out of it, not something that we can allow to be a victim of the pandemic and the lockdown.
Okay, thanks very much, Richard. We've got a few more questions, but I think we're going to move on. And if people want to email me the questions at scotland@party.coop, we'll get you an answer if you want to do that. I think that's fine. So we'll move on now. Thanks very much to Richard. Fantastic contribution as ever. Fantastic to have such a solid cooperator at the head of the Scottish Labour Party, and we did note that you said this will form part of the manifesto for Scottish Labour, and as a member of the policy forum, I will hold him to that, and I'm sure others will as well. But I mean, I know there are lots of people in the Labour movement in Scotland who are very open to our thinking on this, so that's really good. So thanks very much, Richard. I'm going to move on now to Johann Lamont. Johann is the MSP for Glasgow and is the chair of our parliamentary group in Holyrood. Johann's going to give us a kind of brief overview of what the MSPs have done in the last little while, and a bit of a chat about how we might go forward. And also, we're sad to say that Johann will be leaving us at the election, but we are looking for some more candidates to stand. So Johann will hopefully have something to say on that. And then Eva Murray will then speak after Johann, and we'll have a bit of a chat about what's happening in local government, which I think, as Richard and some of the questions pointed out, is really crucial and really important to where we're going just now. So Johann, are you there?
Okay. Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me.
Yep.
I want to, first of all, on behalf of the group, I'm not going to be able to detail everything everybody in the group is doing, but Neil Bibby, Sarah Boyack, Dave Stewart, James Kelly, Claudia Beamish, Rhoda Grant and myself form the cooperative group inside the Parliament, and we work very hard, I think, to make sure that the cooperative message is amplified wherever possible. And I want to thank Richard McCready for all his support of the group and the Cooperative Party and the Cooperative Group for all they do to give us the resources to pursue some of these campaigns. I want to say a couple of things first about where we find ourselves, and then I'm going to say a wee bit about the Scottish Parliament itself. These are, of course, really tough times, and I hope everyone's keeping safe. Now I think everything's under question. The business model that meant that young people were exploited in hospitality retail, that carers didn't get the proper respect they had, I think quite rightly has been exposed in this crisis. We see that we have a social security system that is neither social nor secure, and the furlough system had to go in place simply because everybody realised that the current system couldn't support people. I've always loved the cooperative movement. I think it's so relevant now. Global values, locally realised, not tested just by how good the ideas are, but by their practical delivery. And I think we need cooperative approaches, but also that underpinning of practical delivery in everything that we do. I think too much of our politics has become about giving people things, offers, but actually not touching on the things that would really make a difference to their lives. But we're now in an economic and social crisis, and everything we do, everything should be tested against whether it's going to address that crisis or not. We need to strip out all of the bits of indulgences that we've seen growing at particularly at Scottish Government level, and ask, when we're spending money, are we making a real difference? I've never really understood why people are surprised that the care sector is under such pressure when the Scottish Government has deliberately and willfully stripped resources out of local government. What did they imagine was going to happen? We've seen charitable, cooperative care sectors pushed out of the sector because they can't make it work, because the costs have been borne down on so heavily. So I think this is a time when we start having a very serious conversation about that. In Scotland, we have a huge gap between rhetoric and reality. We're seeing it in the way in which the crisis has been developed. The Scottish Government claims something is happening, on the ground something completely different. And I again think this is where our values and ideas and the things that Richard spoke so much about really need to play in, and whether we don't just say, you know, this would be a good idea to do it, actually do the heavy lifting of making it work is what government is about. I don't think there are any easy fixes, and I would caution the left as much as anybody else against thinking there are easy things that we can campaign for. I think it's all about looking at, will this really make a difference, how do we fund it, and so on. And I think that's reflected in the work that the cooperative group has done in the last year. Done a lot of work on housing, particularly what are the barriers to cooperative housing, with the support of credit unions. What are the credit unions been asked to do now in terms of supporting people financially? I don't even think it's scraping the surface of the potential for the credit union movement. We've looked at how we make sure cooperatives are properly identified in the economy and supported. And Richard's already made the point about the disgraceful sidelining of cooperative development in Scotland, and we need to amplify that. We've talked about the extent to which we teach cooperative economics at every level of education, and we know that doesn't happen. We've looked at interventions in the environment and energy, and fair trade, bus re-regulation, consumer rights, and of course on fair tax and on the right to food. And of course we also remember the Cooperative Party was very much at the front of the modern slavery campaign, reflecting both on our history but realising that there are now people still trapped in circumstances where they have no freedom to operate. These are really the main things I wanted to say. I think there is no doubt that as a group in the Scottish Parliament, we've sought to influence policy, to expose where there's a gap between policy and what's happening on the ground. And it is about resourcing at local level. You can't have a policy of theoretical localism. You can't make it happen. I'm astonished that the Finance Secretary thinks that she can get £150 million from the UK government and not think that that money should go immediately and directly to local government. She hasn't got the imagination to think what needs to be done right now. What do schools and education need right now in order to make sure that we have a real educational opportunities for our young people? So as I say, we have worked very hard on all of these issues, and I'm sure we'll continue to do so. I just wanted to say, in conclusion, this will be my last outing at the AGM as the chair of the cooperative group, and indeed as a cooperative MSP and as a Labour MSP. It's been a huge privilege. Dave Stewart and I are both going, and we wish him well in everything he has done and recognise his contribution. But I would never have been an MSP if the Cooperative Party had not nominated me. Somebody in the Co-op Party had said, would you think of standing? I would never have thought of it myself. And it has been a huge privilege. And anybody out there who's thinking about standing, please think about standing as a cooperative candidate. Put your name forward, because you have a whole new dimension to your politics, a whole new set of opportunities and a different set of voices and ideas to amplify. And I just want to, in conclusion, to thank everybody for all the support that they've given to the group this year and in the past, but to thank everyone for the privilege I've had in the last 20 years in representing not just the Labour Party but the Cooperative Party. Thanks, Richard.
Thanks very much, Joanne. And I mean, I think we've been very lucky to have you in the Parliament represent us, but there's still more work for you to do in the next year or so, but we're not finished yet. Can we go over then to Councillor Eva Murray, who's a Labour and Co-op councillor in the City of Glasgow. Eva wants to. Eva, you there?
Yeah, can you hear me all right?
Yeah, that's great.
Thanks, Richard. Yes, so I'm just going to talk a little bit about some of the highlights I think that local government across Scotland have been pushing on this year in terms of cooperative solutions. So one of the big things I think that I've seen is the food initiatives working, basically doing a local solution to what has been done in the Scottish Parliament on the statutory right to food. One of the biggest initiatives that I've seen is from Councillor Carson Sullivan in West Lothian. She established a West Lothian food network, and I've just seen the other day that she tweeted about how it's now been moved into a community food hub to support those who are struggling to access food. This is an idea that I know Carson had long before the current pandemic, and I think through this pandemic it's shown just how crucial it is. And in Glasgow, the food initiatives that we've been looking at through some of the committees are community-run pantries. This was an idea taken from Pittsburgh, where they're already implementing it through vouchers for fresh food and giving dignity to people who maybe have had to use food banks. So it's just trying to look at different alternatives to that. Another, it's already been mentioned by Richard, is what Councillor Joe Cullinan's been doing in North Ayrshire. I think it's brilliant what the community wealth building, basically giving communities more say over how their communities are run and where the money goes in that. I think it's given us a blueprint across Scotland and different local authorities. What's working in North Ayrshire might not be the exact piece that will work in, say, Glasgow or one of the bigger cities, but it's definitely given us a start and a blueprint. And I think it's shown us that if you just go out and do it, then it's a really opportunity to do that. Yeah, I think a lot of the stuff that Joanne's mentioned, we're just trying to implement at local levels. For instance, Daniel Johnson's bill on shop workers and things like that too. And I think one of the biggest things as a Glasgow councillor is just ensuring that cooperative solutions are still on the agenda. It's obviously an SNP minority council. We have managed to keep the status of a cooperative council, but it's more about trying to push for the ideas, not being a headline, basically. I think going forward at local government level, there's a huge opportunity here, especially post-COVID. One of the big things is the community ownership. And I talk about real community empowerment, and a lot of the local authorities talk about participatory budgeting. That's not it. That's not community empowerment. Getting a few people in a room who can make it at a specific time to vote on what projects should get money isn't what we shouldn't call that community empowerment. So it needs to be real empowering local communities to make decisions for themselves because they know their communities best. I think councils have a huge role in that. In my own ward, we've seen really successful asset transfers taking place, but it needs to be more than that. I think one of the big things during this crisis that's shown me that these hubs are community centres are so vital. They are the ones who have been, at the forefront of responding to this crisis. And my fear is that once this all starts to you know, we start to lift lockdown or get back to some sort of normality, a lot of these centres will be under threat, or their staff or their service users. I think that we need to be ready with cooperative solutions and alternatives to save them, and ensure that they're resilient for whatever lies ahead, whether that's a second peak or just getting back on their feet, just because of funding drying up, or budgets in councils being cut, or in Glasgow's case, schemes being revamped that are just a disaster. So I think there's a real opportunity for us to talk about cooperative solutions and trying to ensure communities are running what they're doing there. Another thing is, Joanne mentioned it, I think Richard did too, about credit unions. There's loads of examples of what we could be doing in terms of that. I think there's a generation now, or a couple of generations, that don't understand what credit unions are, maybe because they're not on their doorstep or anything, or something like that. But there's an opportunity for us to highlight these in curriculums and make it about education. There was a brilliant scheme in Renfrewshire and Glasgow, and I'm not sure if any other local authorities have done it in the past, about giving every school child a £10 credit union account. It was my predecessor in this ward, actually, Paul Rooney, who implemented it as treasurer in Glasgow. That's fallen by the wayside in Glasgow anyway, so I think we have to implement things like that again and show that there's alternatives, like local banking too, which we've seen in Edinburgh. But yeah, I think there's a real opportunities to do things. I'm going to stick with my comparisons around the world, but there's an example I saw when I was in Detroit last year about a community wealth fund where people can get advice and support and then create community enterprises. So I think there's like a community bank involved in that too. So I think there's a real opportunity to not just start from the very beginning. If there's stuff being done around the world, we should take inspiration from that and try and implement it in our own way. A big thing is public ownership and accountability in public utilities and specifically transport. It's already been spoken about again, but supporting renewable energy cooperatives. I'm talking about Glasgow a lot because that's what I know, but I know there's brilliant work being done across Scotland. But the Glasgow Community Energy, who are working hard just now to try and get their first renewable energy installation up and running. But yeah, it was in the Glasgow Labour Manifesto. It's something we should be looking more into. I think there's nothing more powerful than communities owning utilities, and it would drastically reduce costs too, so it's a win-win in my eyes. Transport, I think there needs to be a renewed push for bus ownership to be taken back into municipal ownership, and then looking at mutualised solutions and how routes are run and things like that. I know there was a big issue with First in Glasgow and that fell through. I don't think we can forget that. I think if anything, we're going to have a big issue of trying to regain people's trust in using public transport after this crisis. So the least we can do is have routes that run for them and enough buses to carry them. So I think there's a huge opportunity for us to do there. And just on the kind of issue of transport and vehicles, it's actually Councillor Stephen Curran who spoke to me a couple of months ago about the Co-Wheels initiative. I know it's been hit in a number of cities across the UK, but it's basically a cooperative who allow you to hire hybrids or electric vehicles for short periods of time. It is a cooperative, so I think looking at alternatives to that to people who maybe cannot use transport due to how bad it is just now, or are forced to use a car, there are opportunities there too. I think everything I've spoken about there links into the idea of a cooperative Green New Deal. We've got a huge opportunity where the co-op and the Scottish Co-op could be highlighting a lot of things in the lead up and during COP26. When it comes to Glasgow, that's through education and involvement of people. But I just think the co-op has a huge part to play in pushing what our vision is, and it's a community-led vision, and putting a platform for working on that legacy too, which is a big thing that I've pushed on in Glasgow, is that it can't just be a one event thing or one conference and then that's it. It has to be a legacy for the whole of the UK. So we have an opportunity to talk about that. But green future-proof jobs too, that not only take workers with us in the run-up, but empower them too. So I think there's empower them once the jobs are there too. So that's a real opportunity. But I'll just briefly talk about what I've been doing over the crisis and what I've kind of learned from that. So in the past 12 weeks, every weekday I've been down in Yoker, which is in my ward, in a community support hub, which I helped set up with another local councillor and one of our community stalwarts. And we deliver food, we deliver prescriptions. We using community partners have helped with mental health support, money advice. And I think throughout this crisis, the biggest thing for me is how communities have come together. There are a number of community leaders in my area who had never met each other until this crisis, and I think if anything we need to support that. And I think they've talked about, they don't even know they're talking about it, but they're talking about cooperative solutions going forward. And I think if we're there to support that going forward, whether that's a cooperative solution to the youth project that's going under, or community centres that are having to shut, or just, you know, a credit union, these are the people who know their communities most, and we can't let that die once, you know, we start to lift lockdown. There's bonds being made there and a network being made, and if we can empower them and support them from the back as elected members, support them, not take over, then I think that's the greatest thing. But I think in our new normal, whatever that is, we just have to think outside the box, and I think the Cooperative Party has the solutions to that. And just as Joanne was talking about standing for election, so I think more than anything during this crisis, it's taught me that the power of people and the need for people-centric solutions. So we need people at all levels of power and are willing to support those calls, whether that's devolving power down or supporting the initiatives already on the ground in communities. And that's what cooperative politicians believe in, and why I think we need more of us. So if real community empowerment is what you're about, then you absolutely should consider, if you're considering standing for any level of government, whether that's, you know, your local council, Holyrood or Westminster, then if you believe in community empowerment, then you absolutely should be thinking about standing as a co-op candidate too.
Okay, thanks very much. Anybody got any questions on that? Don't all rush at once. I think there's some excellent. I mean, I think. Can I just say that I've put in the chat there a link to our community cooperator pledge, which is kind of what Eva was just talking about in some respects, about how we build on some of the experiences where people have come together, mutual aid groups where they've come together. You know, I think I've probably misspoken in some ways in what I've written, but I mean, I think in terms of, you know, we don't necessarily want these community aid groups to continue in their current format, but we want to continue with that way of doing things, that way of doing business. I think that would be really, really good. And just in terms of the candidate stuff, people who are members of the Co-op Party will have had an email from Ben Proctor about this, but we are encouraging people to apply to be candidates by the 26th of the month, and you know, it's hugely important that we look towards some of the things that we've talked about today, but we look towards that our group in the Scottish Parliament and our groups in local government in Scotland, reflecting the diversity of Scotland as we go forward. So really encouraging women, LGBT plus folk and BAME people to put their names forwards. So encourage people to do that. And if you haven't got any, if you need some more information on that, just the simplest email is scotland@party.coop. So anyone got any questions for Joanne or for Eva? Are we going to let them off lightly? Is it lunchtime already?
I'll get a game to go to.
Joanne, I can assure you this meeting would not be happening if you had a game to go to. Sorry, there will be fewer in jokes from now on. Can I just ask, in terms of you know, in terms of the COP26, I mean, I think both Eva and Joanne obviously represent Glasgow, and that's going to be a huge event in Glasgow. But I mean, is there anything you think we should be doing with regard to that? I mean, I think that's, you know, it's meant to be this year. It's been postponed to November, I think, of next year. I mean, I think it's a real opportunity for us to say, you know, some of the things Richard talked about, you know, there being green cooperative solutions to some of the problems around this. But I don't know if Joanne or Eva have got anything they want to say on that.
Yeah, I'll come in on that one. I met with the people who were meant to be running COP25 in Chile before it got moved to Madrid last year, and they had a whole plan of like an alternative people's conference which would run alongside COP26, and where they would invite, you know, activists and different parties to contribute who couldn't be involved in the direct conference. So I think there's a huge opportunity for the Cooperative Party to be part of that and have our own kind of events and invite people. I think we just have to take the opportunity that all these world leaders are going to be in Glasgow, and also all these delegates who will be interested in what kind of things we're doing. So I think there's a real opportunity for that. I know in the Glasgow Labour group we've spoken about that too.
Can I say that I wonder whether, I mean, maybe I'm just I'm so struck by the fact that when I first joined the Scottish Parliament, I couldn't possibly ever have imagined that we would have had this kind of meeting with this kind of technology, that the world moves on so fast. I'm wondering, I think the biggest challenge, I think people who are interested in these issues think that the event's a really important event, but how does it break out into the real world? And given that so much now, we've realised so much of what we think is absolutely crucial to politics isn't really crucial at all. The most important thing is face-to-face conversations. I wonder if these big summits, in the way in which they're conducted, they generate money for the local economy, they generate interest. I'm not sure of how the legacy works out. And what I do think, though, is that Glasgow, and Labour in Glasgow in particular, should be shouting from the rooftops about how they managed the Commonwealth Games and the legacy around that, and the heavy lifting around that, because this is my fear always, particularly with the SNP, that they want to tick the box, but the actually really hard work around making it, you know, make a difference to people is not going to be done in that way. So I think Glasgow Labour has a particular role to play in talking about the impact more generally of that kind of event. But I also think we need to be talking about, yes, you hook onto that event, but is that how we're going to be doing things in the future? I think possibly not. I imagine that a lot of what was seen as normal, necessary conferences, business events, networking events, could all just go because we've realised that they've not been central to people's working lives or to our own lives. But I also think we need to find a way of really engaging, well, young people are already engaged in this issue. So how do we learn from what young people are changing their lives and how they do everything because of their commitment in these questions? How does that impose itself or impact itself on those who are then making political decisions? But again, to repeat myself, I do think there's a huge thing in Scottish politics, but embracing new ideas, but never actually delivering on any of them because it's skin deep, and I think that would be the challenge. But I genuinely think that Labour led the way around Glasgow being a cooperative council, and on how you run these kind of events, and we should be, you know, making the most of that as well in terms of just general impact on Glasgow as well as on these massive big issues.
Okay, thanks. Thanks very much, Joanne. I think thanks to Eva and Joanne for their contribution. Can I invite Rita to say a few words and to close our meeting today? I think you should be unmuted now, Rita.
Me unmuted, is it? Thank you. We're going to thank all the people who joined in our Zoom call today, and hope those for which it was the first time they'd done it, hope they enjoyed the experience. Can I thank Richard, Joanne and Eva for leading our conversation, and Richard McCready for sorting out the technology, and the backroom team, because there's some other people behind Richard sorting all the technology out, and it seems to have worked effectively, and that's good. Can I encourage people to get the thinking caps on and feed into the development of co-op policy for the Scottish parliamentary elections? And of course, we then will feed that into the Labour Policy Forum, and Richard is on that on behalf of the Co-op Party. And we heard Richard Leonard saying that he would welcome our contributions. So the door is open for that. Could I encourage people to download the report, Owning the Future? You can just Google it. But if you go into the Co-op's website, if you know how to do that, it's easy to download your own copy, and it's a really good document to read and starts the old grey matter working. And I think the challenge that all of the speakers were giving us was that we've all got to start thinking about how we actually take our values and our principles and make them local and come up with local solutions, and that the opportunity is there for these solutions to be recognised and tried out, and both in our own area but also in Scotland, because things have got to change. I think that's the message from the report and the message that everybody was giving us today. So thank you all for attending. And you can now switch us all off, Richard. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rita. Thanks. Bye to everybody. Thanks for joining us.
Bye-bye.